pretty much grew up in Stanley, North Dakota. I was born in Montana, but my parents moved back for a business opportunity and shortly after I was born. So I call myself a Montanan, but really I spent most of my life in North Dakota. Yeah, we were city kids. My dad was a son of a homesteader, as was my mom.
Okay.
But he had this farm equipment business, and that's why he moved back from Montana with his young family, so that he would have an opportunity to work with his brother in this farm equipment business. So I always had an interest in farming, and later in life I did get an opportunity to give it a try. So I did try that for 20 years, but that was in addition to being in the school system.
Mm-hmm.
I was a school counselor in the Stanley school system, and I did own my dad's business for 10 years before that. So I've done quite a few different things in my life. I was a soldier in between there. College at Grand Forks a couple times. On the GI Bill, I had an opportunity to get my master's degree in counseling, and so I was a counselor, school counselor in Stanley. And then later in life, I retired from Minot Public as one of their elementary principals. Because your mom or dad did something doesn't mean you can't think something bigger. So I always encouraged my students to think big. My grandpas were both hard workers, and they both worked late. My grandfather was interviewed by the local newspaper. He was, I think, 88 years old, and he was ice skating down at the city park on homemade ice skates. And so, you know, being active has always been an important thing. And no shortage of work ethic. And I learned that from them. You know, the harder you work, the more successful you are. And my kids are both successful, and their kids are in elementary school now, but I see some very good things happening there as well. So, you know, I'm looking forward to staying as vital as long as I can, so I can see that next generation jump in and work hard like my wife and I did. I was like a lot of kids who did a lot of doodling in school when we weren't working on math and those kind of things. We were doing art, drawing pictures, and I had some friends who were very good artists, and of course that being competitive, it was always interesting to see what I could do there. And I always had an interest in mechanics. My dad being a mechanic, and we started off young with go-karts and homemade kinds of equipment. And my dad was a good welder, and when I was 12, he taught me how to weld with oxygen acetylene. And we started off with brazing, where you melt brass and join steel together, or brass for that matter. Kind of branched from there. I took an adult welding class because as a city kid, they wouldn't let us take BOAG except for 1 year, and they didn't do welding that freshman year. So I had to take an adult class as a high school student, and I got pretty good with a stick welder. I'd heard a story about a couple of guys that were up in the local bar, and one of them had drunk so much he tipped over with his head on the table and tipped his glass over, and so that picture stuck in my mind. And so that was my first art piece. I used nuts and bolts for the male figures, and a bolt for the tipped over glass, and I had the one guy going like this guy had just fallen on the table in front of him, and he's passed out right on the table. And I thought it was kind of cool, and I had done all the welding and cutting myself, and it was made out of junk. And my neighbor across the alley was a banker and a family friend. And he saw that piece and he said, "Could you do one of those for me?" He said, "I'd really like that." And so for him, being as how he was going to be in prestigious company, I made it real nice. It wasn't put together with no forethought. I mean, I think I really did a nice job, and as far as I know, it's still in that family. And it's a simple piece that told a story. I mean, everybody that saw it knew what had happened there. Somebody has had too much to drink, and they fell on the table and tipped their glass. So to use art like that to tell a little story has been fun, and I got a lot of feedback, good feedback for it. So, you know, I branched off into other things, little like a moldboard plow and a wagon wheel, and I made a little sculpture like that, and I made a sculpture of a motorcycle, and I started making these things, and then I would get a lot of affirmation. People would tell me, "That's really cool," you know, or that's nice. Could you make me one? So the kinds of art that I've done it's varied so much over the years. I found early that I made some things that people really liked, but I just couldn't make them anymore. I just struggled with the repetitiveness of it. I envisioned working on a manufacturing line in a car plant or something, and you're putting that same bolt in the hole all day long, and that's really difficult for me. So even if I get something that I could sell and make a lot of make a good return on it, I just can't keep doing the same thing time after time. So I'm always looking for new ways to express myself. I try not to look at other people's art too much, because I don't want to steal anyone else's ideas. I'd rather have them be mine. So when I have an idea, I might draw a sketch of it, put it in my file, and keep it. And then at some point down the road, I think, oh yeah, I remember working on something like that. And then I've got that thought to start with. I have made quite a few pieces for the Great Tomato Fest. And they're all different. And I started, you know, they started off at $100, and a few years later they were worth $200, and then some of them got up over $300. And that's a donation for the arts in the Minot area. that was better than writing out a check, because I got a chance to use my skills to do something that somebody thought was important enough to pay that kind of money for. It's never been about the money. 30 years ago, I think I made the statement, you know, if you can't make a living doing what you're doing in art, you're probably not a real artist. When we moved to Minot, I got involved in the art community, and they asked me to put a booth up at Art Fest. And I was kind of apprehensive about it because I didn't know if what I did could sell or not. So the first Friday night, I walked out of there with $1,300. And I don't know if it maybe took me 1,300 hours to make it. I'm not sure. But nevertheless, I was feeling pretty good. And I said, you know, I guess I could do this. But it's also fair to say that North Dakotans are not known for paying a lot of money for art. And the old expression is, oh, my uncle can make that. He's got a welder at his farm. You know, if I had a price on something and they might have thought it was a little too much, they'd say, oh, my uncle can do that and he won't charge me anything. And I got good enough where I said, go ahead, and you know, I hope your uncle does well with it, but he's going to find out this is not easy.
Yeah.
My metal work is pretty good, and I'm not saying that to brag, but I've been doing this for 60 years. I say young man, he's maybe not quite so young anymore, but named Bennett Brian from the Belcourt area. He is so talented. He had pieces at UND when I was going there, and his work is really wonderful. He is the buffalo in front of the Heritage Center. That's his.
Okay.
He's done lots of big pieces. He did a piece at Minot State, the beaver. And I've always liked woodwork. I've built 3 houses. Did a lot of the finish work in those houses, so you know, I like wood. The thing I say about wood is if you cut it off too short, you better grab a new board. With metal, if you cut it off too short, you can just add it on and it's just as strong as it was before with welding. I've got on my show that's running at the Tobby right now, I've got a little wood carving. It's called chip carving. And there's a famous professor from Iowa. I think he teaches in maybe a church college, but he's just known around the world as an excellent chip carver. And so I've got a piece that kind of reflects that. In fact, he came to our school when I was a school principal, and they came around at Hustfest and presented their work in front of our students. And so I carried in the carving I made that was inspired by him. And he said, oh, where'd you get that? And I said, well, I carved that from your plans. He said, I thought it was mine. He said, that's identical. That's the same kind of work I do. So that was a compliment. This is my 3rd show at the Tobby Museum of Art. and they want you to have every piece be new and different, nothing from the past. And so, you know, and you should have probably 40 or 50 pieces to have a decent part of a show. So the metal seems to be what people are more interested in. I had a show up at Williston at the James Memorial Arts Center, and I sold quite a few pieces up there. I was really surprised, but I had a show, it ran for a month, and I got some really nice sales and some critique. In fact, some of the people call me up once in a while and say, I still have that piece that you made for me. And, you know, they paid for it. It's, I don't know if I could put a dollar per hour figure on what I do. It's probably done quite reasonably. Tools you use, like the arc welders and the plasma cutters and that kind of equipment, they need maintenance, and you need to feed them with welding rod and so forth, and that material has gotten quite expensive. So I've got a friend that he charges $100 an hour with his welding business, and I don't think I would believe it if I could get $100 an hour. I would say that some of the pieces that are more intense and you know, a bigger scale of product, they're 2 or 3, 4 a.m. in the morning kind of work, and you're building this in your mind, and you're going through all the motions. And I made a lot of special tools, homemade custom tools, to make metal do what I wanted it to do. So it's not only looking in your mind at the product that you want to produce, the artwork, but it's how can I make metal do what I want it to do? And I like solving those problems. And some of it is just basic old blacksmithing. I'm not a blacksmith, but I do use a lot of blacksmithing techniques. I use the forge and the anvil quite often. I heat metal and shape it. There's an old saying, cold iron blacksmith will never go to heaven. So that means that if you're a real blacksmith, you should use a forge. And every community had a blacksmith in their neighborhood, but so I'm not a blacksmith, but I do have to use many of the techniques that they used. And I was lucky when I was in the farm equipment business. A blacksmith across the street who was a family friend and who let me watch him as a little kid sharpen plow lathes in the forge. He came to work for me for a couple years, and I'd put him on a job fixing some old piece of equipment or doing this and that, and he was teaching me at the same time. I would be asking the right questions, and I could get him to respond in a way that I could understand. And so I did learn a lot from a real blacksmith. I have something in mind generally, and I may have a story behind it, but I've learned that you don't want to interpret the story for people. people like to draw their own conclusions, and they might even ask you, you know, well, what's in this piece, or why did you do this? And I would like to reflect back on them and say, well, what do you see in there? You know, what does it mean to you? Because my story may be different than theirs. A classic thing that happened was I used to make a lot of little crosses out of wire from the flood of 2011 here in Minot. And it was just a little simple shaped cross. I've got one right over here on my left shoulder. But and to me, it's a cross. It's the outline of a cross. And I had a little 5-year-old kid look at that, and she said, well, I think it's an angel. I was taken by surprise. And then their little sibling said, well, it looks like a ghost to me. There's a lesson for all of us there. You know, we don't want to be telling people what they're seeing with art. Let people draw their own conclusions. And sometimes we can help them with finding, you know, what the story is or whatever, but you should leave some interpretation to the beholder. And that 5-year-old kid is just as important as a 40-year-old adult. What they're seeing is important to them. If I didn't do something creative, I wouldn't be keeping up with my family, because they're all working in their own field. My wife is a writer. She's written several books. She's working on another book about our family right now. Yeah, both my kids have a real creative entrepreneurial aspect to them. So, and my wife, like I say, she's a writer, written a number of books, working on another one right now on family history, and she's done a book on each one of my art shows. And they're just fun to go through and think back what I did 10 or 15 years ago. Without those books, it would be hard to do that. So, her son is 12 years old. He's got his first piece on my art show at the Tobby. He did all the welding. He's got a very cool little piece there. It's a little alien on a little flying saucer. And I'm real proud of him. I mean, I did it at 12, but I wouldn't expect anybody else to do that. My son started welding when he was in VOAG, you know, maybe as a sophomore or junior, and he's very good. He can pick it up real easily. So hopefully all those kids will work with it at some point. Quite a few of the pieces, especially the significant, the biggest and most intensive ones, they're not for sale. I've had a lot of opportunity to sell things, but they're just not for sale. And the only way to describe it for me is when you think of a woman giving birth to that baby, they're not giving that up. And when I have an idea and I come out here in the shop and execute on it, and when I'm finished I look at it and I say, man, that's pretty good. That's hard to give up. And I've got some pieces that I've been offered significant money for. They're just not for sale. There's no price. It's when you have taken them from nothing and turned them into something. And then, you know, my kids, I have to accept the fact that down the road, they might get bored with it and say, you know, let's sell it and move on, or let's give it away. And or my grandkids or great grandkids. Somewhere down the road, somebody's not going to be excited about it. I have to accept that. But I'm hopeful that this will wind up, these things will wind up in private collections. I've got some collectors in Minot and around the whole U.S., really, and some foreign countries that have my stuff. And they're very proud of it, and they're proud of saying they know the person that did this. And so, you know, I'm leaving some things behind that are valued by people. Money-wise or not really doesn't matter. It's just that they like them. They like to look at them. I can't say that there's a lesson, you know, a life lesson, that there's a big value in some of what I do, or maybe any of what I do, but there's kind of a mystery connected with a couple of these things, and I think I'd be remiss if I didn't talk just a little bit about that. The two crosses that I did, one for First Lutheran here in Minot and one for American Lutheran in Stanley, they all have a lot of religious symbols on, and they have a lot of crosses on. The one at First Lutheran has several hundred crosses on it. There's one cross that's upside down there. And when they go to the Tobby and see the smaller one, the one at First Lutheran is 12 feet tall. The one at the Tobby is 8 feet tall. And when you look at that one too, there's a lot of crosses on there. One of them is upside down. And I don't like to tell too many people about that. I would like somebody to discover it on their own and say, man, that guy, you know, what was he thinking? That cross is upside down. So far, that hasn't happened. And I've just mentioned to a few people, and to my knowledge, unless I point it out, they don't see it. But I'm not claiming to be a super religious person, but I am a good churchgoer, and you know, I do believe. But I am the statement for me with that upside down cross is that we go through life and we all get upside down with the cross, whether we want to or not. And we do that by not forgiving our neighbor. On the cross, Jesus forgave them for what they were doing to him. And we can't forgive the kid that pulled our ear in the 3rd grade. You know, it's very difficult for us living in this world to forgive people for the transgressions that we think they've done to us. So, to me, that's a very good message to leave, and it's, whether you're Christian or not really doesn't matter. It's, you know, all of us have issues, and we fail to be good stewards with what we've been given. So that's probably the most important message I have left in my art.